Chapter 6. Bluish-grey fouled by crimson. This is Glenn Dudley, who will be serving as our replacement Ralph. Elian couldn't believe her ears. Mabel had just introduced a new boy to the actors gathered backstage, an affable young man, his brown hair tinged with gold, who was most definitely not Felix.
Oh.
What's this? Outwardly, Elian gently tilted her head in confusion, but all the while, her bluish-grey eyes darkened. Why is Prince Felix not the replacement? I am the heroine, am I not? Why will Prince Felix not stand in for the hero? Ah, I know. This Glenn Dudley fellow must have selfishly demanded the role. The nerve. That simply must be what happened, she told herself, calming her emotions. Mabel, the acting director and the one who had brought Glenn backstage, pushed up the rim of her glasses and said, incidentally, Glenn was directly recommended by Prince Felix. Elian desperately held back a very unladylike what? Prince Felix recommended him? The prince suggested this man play the role of my husband. How could she tolerate such a thing? She could not. Felix was supposed to be her husband. Now he was pairing her up with someone else. She couldn't bear it. And the man in question lacked even a shred of class or grace. Heya, I'm Glenn Dudley. Never acted before, but I used to pretend to be the hero Ralph all the time as a kid, so I'm sure I'll do fine. Everyone present wondered how in the world he could draw such confidence from such limited experience, and Elian was no exception. The others stared at the newcomer, distrust evident on their faces. She wanted to follow suit, but instead she offered a graceful, noble smile and introduced herself. I am Elian Hyatt, playing the role of Amelia. It's a pleasure to be working with you, Lord Glenn. You're playing Amelia? He asked. He blinked and looked down at her, seeming a little surprised. Elian was the daughter of a duke. She was sure he must be nervous at the thought of sharing a stage with such a high-class lady. But then he said, you seem kinda different from the cool Amelia I always imagined. The other actors immediately froze. Elian kept the soft smile on her face, but flames of rage ignited in her bluish-grey eyes. Elian wasn't a good fit to play Amelia, and everyone knew it. But she'd been chosen anyway, because she was Felix's second cousin, which made Duke Clockford her great-uncle. Since the school was under his jurisdiction, she enjoyed a status similar to Felix's. Taking this into account, the other students had chosen to make her the heroine. Elian knew there had been a secret, unofficial vote for who should play the role, and she hadn't even made the top 3. So, while Glenn hadn't meant anything by his remark, it had hit Elian's biggest sore spot. Naturally, she didn't let her anger show. She maintained the facade of a high-class noblewoman. It's true, she said. I may be a far cry from the great Queen Amelia, but I will still do my best to play the part. Her smile was tranquil on the surface, but deep down, she sharpened the blade of her malice and let crimson wrath burn in her eyes. Ah, what a fool he is. I must make him aware of his position. Of how arrogant he is to even think of standing at my side. Why don't you come witness Dudley's valiant performance from the reserved seats? Felix said, bringing Monica all the way to the front row, where he'd been sitting for the first half. Is someone going to be mad at me for sitting here? She stammered. You're part of the student council. There shouldn't be any issues. Lana was running around backstage making minor adjustments to the costumes. Apparently, she wouldn't finish until the moment the play started, and it was unlikely she'd make it back to her seat. So instead, Monica would watch Glenn's theatrical debut seated next to Felix. Both parts of this situation were bad for her health. As she held a hand to her stomach, Felix looked at the white rose decoration at Monica's breast. That flower. Let me guess. Did Cyril give that to you?
Huh.
Oh yes. Monica nodded vigorously. He said it was a lucky charm so that I wouldn't embarrass myself. Felix blinked in surprise. I see. Is that what he said? I suppose that's very like him, he muttered to himself, still staring at the decoration. She thought she saw his eyes narrow slightly, almost imperceptibly, in displeasure. That, for some reason, unsettled her deeply. Monica began to fidget, and Felix immediately reverted to his usual gentle smile. "This is your first school festival," he said. "Are you having fun?" If she was telling the truth, there hadn't been any time to have fun. That was partly because of her mission to guard Felix, but she'd also been running around that morning trying to retrieve the shamanic tool. She smiled vaguely and tried to dodge the issue. "Well, it's, only just started." Are you having fun, sir?" "Well, I'm the host, so I'm supposed to be making sure everyone else has fun." Monica knew this festival was partly meant as a public debut for the second prince and to show off his grandfather Duke Clockford's power and authority to the kingdom's nobles. But it seems like... Felix's words sounded sad to Monica. She couldn't help recalling the night they'd spent in Corlapton. He'd called himself Ike during the bell-ringing festival and gallivanted through the nighttime streets with her. He'd grinned mischievously, twisted her around his little finger, spoken at length about the things he enjoyed. It seemed to her he'd had a lot of fun that night. "Monica." Felix looked at her anxiously as she fell silent. His brows lowered slightly into a frown, and for a moment, she wondered whether she was looking at the prince or at Ike. This was Serendia Academy. The one beside her was Felix Arkridill, the second prince. But it seemed so sad to write off the boy named Ike as a single night's illusion. "I can't be thinking about this right now. I have to focus on protecting him." Monica stifled the sadness bubbling up inside her and awkwardly spoke up. I wonder if Glenn is going to be okay." She had to admit her change of topic sounded forced, but she was worried about Glenn. She recalled their ballroom dance class, when he'd enthusiastically declared, "I'll just try and mimic everyone else," then proceeded to fling her around the room. The memory was still fresh in her mind, and, in all honesty, she couldn't imagine his acting going much better. But Felix didn't look particularly worried. In fact, he seemed to be enjoying himself. "I'm sure he'll be fine," he said. "He has a lot of spirit. Just as I'd expect from a famous mage's disciple."
Heh.
Monica knew Glenn was a mage's apprentice, but not that his master was famous. Come to think of it, he said his master was the one who sent him here. But Felix had spoken without hesitation. Who could his master be? Monica idly called to mind the high mags she knew of, but none of them quite fit. Besides, if a famous mage's pupil was going anywhere, wouldn't it be Minerva's? Why would Glenn's master choose Serendia? The bell rang, interrupting her thoughts and signaling the start of the show. The second half of the play was about to begin. The student doing the narration explained the events thus far, ending with a description of how the main character Ralph arrived at the Black Dragon's lair. "Seems they've abbreviated the story a bit," murmured Felix. Did they? "Usually, they act out the events leading up to his battle with the dragon. They must have omitted it all." The curtains opened, and a papier-mâché dragon entered from the stage's left side. It was made of paper and cloth plastered onto a wooden framework, but it was of excellent quality. And above all, it was big. Several people were inside, moving it. The black dragon's wild, piercing scream echoed through the venue. Then two people appeared from the right, the main character Ralph and the heroine Amelia. Glenn, playing Ralph, smoothly unsheathed the sword at his waist and pointed it at the dragon, reciting his line. "It is I, bestowed with the divine protection of the 7 spirit kings. You have brought ruin enough to this land, dragon. Taste my blade." Even those confused by the change in actors were pulled back into the story the moment they heard that voice. Glenn wasn't a particularly talented actor, but his voice carried well, and his sharp movements easily drew the audience's attention. "Ha!" Glenn leaped into the air and brought his sword down on the dragon. Then, as he landed, he delivered a flashy horizontal slice. Felix murmured, "His swings are a little exaggerated for real combat, but they're perfect for the stage." Glenn's swordsmanship was the opposite of the elegant style favored by nobles. It was unpolished and boorish. But his long limbs moved freely, and the sight of him cutting into the dragon certainly brought the play to life. With power borrowed from the Spirit Kings, the hero Ralph would steadily drive the black dragon back. Eventually, The cornered creature would use the last of its strength to open its mouth and spit flame. The heroine Amelia would then block it with a defensive barrier, while Ralph delivered the finishing blow, right between the dragon's eyes. At the end, Amelia would run to Ralph, give him a celebratory kiss, and the curtains would fall. At least, that was the traditional sequence of events. "Damn human," roared the dragon. "My flames will burn you to cinders." It spread its wings wide as a burst of sound ripped between Ralph and the dragon. The stagehands had used explosive powder to achieve this effect. Ralph took a step back as Amelia, waiting behind him, raised her voice. "Lord Ralph, I will create a defensive barrier. Take that chance to pierce the dragon's brow." Then she chanted the spell to put up the barrier. It wasn't an actual chant, of course. It was just a performance. Or it was supposed to be. Monica, though, felt something was wrong.
Huh.
She thought. That chant, it's just acting, right? Not many people could instantly grasp the purpose of a spell just from hearing its chant. Plus, the stage itself was a ways back from the audience. Nobody else would have noticed. But the silent witch, extremely familiar with magecraft formulae, just happened to be sitting up front in the reserved seating, and she could make out the words and understand them. Elian was neither reciting a script nor casting a barrier. An attack spell? Elian was standing on the edge of the stage to the audience's right, atop a set piece meant to represent a cliff. They'd taken the balcony from the first half and covered it in paper and cloth so that it resembled a steep precipice. She played her part, looking down at Ralph with worry as he fought the dragon, but her attention never left Felix. The person next to him wasn't a guest but a female student. And it wasn't Bridget Graham, either. It was the unremarkable Monica Norton, another member of the student council. "What is that bland girl doing, sitting next to Prince Felix? That should be my place." Each time Felix spoke to the girl at his side, it sent waves of dismay raging through her heart. Why was Felix bothering with a girl like that when Elian was gazing at him with such longing? When she loved him so much? When she was supposed to be the one he loved? Ralph's fight with the black dragon was about to reach its climax. She had to act like she was casting a defensive barrier to protect the hero from the dragon's attack. She couldn't use barrier spells, of course, so it would just be pretend. This scene employed explosive powder for its special effects. That was what she would use. "I have to make sure they all know Prince Felix is going to choose me." The crimson wrath, the vestiges of the curse, was making Elian uncharacteristically aggressive. And now, with no room to think, she shut her ears to the whisperings of her reason and let anger cloud her bluish-grey eyes, let herself move at its whim. As she pretended to cast a defensive barrier, she unleashed a real wind spell toward the powder. Nobody watching the play would notice that she was using actual magecraft on stage. The clump of air struck the device with the powder, and moments before it burst, it tumbled near Glenn. Now he'd be caught in the explosion. "It's your own fault for making fun of me." Sparks and smoke went flying toward Glenn. He wouldn't be badly injured, the powder was just for a special effect. But it would be enough to shock him and make him fall over. Maybe he'd be so scared, he'd freeze up. Naturally, if Glenn stopped moving, the play would stop as well. And then Elian would declare in her most sonorous voice, "Behold, I knew that man wasn't the true Lord Ralph. My eyes will not be deceived." She would extend her hand to Felix in the audience. "The true Lord Ralph. Look. He's right here." If she did that, Felix would climb onto the stage to save the play. She could simply claim some servant's ineptitude was to blame for the accident with the powder. And then, if she made it seem like her own quick-wittedness had rescued the play from the brink of ruin after an unfortunate accident, everyone would realize that she was talented enough to be with Felix. Glenn Dudley would look stupid in front of everyone. Monica Norton would watch Felix go on stage and learn who was truly best for the prince. Elian's face melted into an entranced, dreamlike smile as she looked down on Glenn from the artificial clifftop. Elian made two miscalculations. The first was that she was a novice when it came to magecraft. The wind spell she'd released would do more than simply knock over the powder on the stage, it would provide the sparks with enough oxygen to form a roaring blaze. The second was that the silent witch, an expert at enchanted magecraft, was in the audience. When she realized Elian was chanting an attack spell on stage, Monica wavered for a moment. She couldn't tell what the girl was aiming at. But she could guess Elian was trying to attack someone, so she followed the actress's eyes to their target. She was glaring at Glenn, still chanting the words of her incantation. Thinking Elian might be targeting him, Monica wasted no time erecting a simple barrier around the boy. It ended up saving him. Elian's wind spell caused the tiny flame in the special effects powder to burst into a blaze heading straight for Glenn. If Monica hadn't put up the barrier, he'd have been badly burned. The rest of the audience, ignorant of the situation, seemed to take the events of the last few seconds as part of the performance. Amelia's barrier had indeed protected Ralph from the Black Dragon's flames. I have to hand it to Serendia Academy. What incredible special effects. That wasn't just an explosive, was it? It was magecraft. This year's play is quite the elaborate affair, using real magecraft for the effect. The spectators leisurely expressed their admiration, but Monica had no time to do the same. The emergency wasn't over yet. While the barrier had stopped the flames from reaching Glenn, the stage was full of wood and paper, all very flammable. Monica poured her focus into solving this problem, working to put out the flames. Pouring water on fire was the quickest way to extinguish it, but then it would be obvious someone was using magecraft. Instead, Monica covered each of the leaping flames in a small barrier. She used the same basic technique as when she'd put out the spiral flame, that magical tool used for assassinations. The small barriers kept out oxygen, quickly smothering the fire inside. Felix watched the play with a serious expression, oblivious to how hard Monica was working to fight the fires before them. How many more left? She wondered, her eyes racing across the stage. Just then, she heard a shrill scream from the right. The set piece under Elian had begun to tilt. The flames had scorched one of its support beams, it was about to collapse. Oh no! If that piece collapsed, the play would turn into a tragedy, both for Elian atop it and Glenn below. It might even harm members of the audience. Monica could maintain only 2 spells at a time, and she was already maintaining 2 barriers to quench the flames. She was out of options. During the few seconds she hesitated, the situation worsened. The wind changed direction, causing the smoke from the explosive powder to cover up the stage for a moment. Now she could no longer see Glenn and Elian. Monica could hear the wood cracking and breaking past the smoky veil. She was out of time. No, I won't make it. Her face paled. Just then something leaped out from the smoke. It was Glenn, carrying Elian in his arms. Flight magecraft. He'd used a flight spell to rescue Elian, then burst out of the smoke into the air. Flight magecraft was rare, not many could use it. And it became far more difficult when you had to carry someone at the same time. But Glenn was pulling it off with ease, sending a commotion through the audience. Wait. I'm still not done putting out the fires. If I release the barriers now, the fire will only grow. As Monica panicked, the stage set collapsed. But it didn't scatter out into the audience. A powerful barrier had contained the debris. The barrier was very precise, safeguarding everyone both in the audience and on stage. The only one who could manage such a feat was a certain master of defensive barriers, the barrier mage himself. Mr. Louis. Louis must have been waiting nearby, springing into action and putting up the barrier in the nick of time. He took longer to cast his barriers than Monica, who didn't need to chant, but their precision and strength were several levels above anything she, or anyone else, could achieve. Around the time he disengaged the barrier, Monica finished her extinguishing work. We made it. Monica pressed a hand to her chest to calm her pounding heart and used the other to covertly wipe the cold sweat that had formed on her brow. What's happening? What's going on? Now lying horizontally in Glenn's arms, Elian was very confused. All she'd wanted to do was knock over the explosive powder and surprise Glenn. But then the flames had roared out of control, and she'd burned part of the set. Even worse, they'd scorched the faux cliff she'd been standing on. It was a simple scaffold, the kind that tumbled down easily if the support beam broke. But just before she was thrown to the ground, she'd felt a different sort of impact. With a soft thump, someone's chest struck her cheek. Powerful arms lifted her up. The smoke made it hard to tell what was going on. She coughed, cracked open her eyes, and saw blue sky.
Hair.
Whoa! We almost didn't make it. The voice was astonishingly close. Finally, she realized Glenn was carrying her. Not only that, they were floating in midair. What's going on? What's happening here? This can get dangerous, so don't let go, K? What are you? What is? Flight magecraft. Gotta say, they didn't tell me about any of this. Come on, director, give a guy some warning. Apparently, Glenn thought this was all part of the play, too. Despite herself, Elian screamed internally, just what does he think plays are like? Below them, the smoke around the stage cleared, revealing an awful sight. The fake cliff had collapsed, and its pieces were scattered all over. It didn't seem to have injured anyone in the audience, though. The papier-mâché black dragon was safe as well. Only now did Elian understand what a terrible thing she'd done. One wrong step and not only would the play have been ruined, people could have died. What have I? She paled and trembled, and Glenn asked if she was okay. He seemed to think she was scared of heights. I'm really good at flight magecraft, so don't worry, he insisted. But if you're still scared, you can hold on as tight as you like. And who would want to hold on to you, exactly? Thought Elian. He flashed her an intrepid grin. Anyway, why don't we wrap things up here?
Hair.
What? You know, give 'em what they came for and all that. A moment later, they were hurtling down toward the stage. Elian screamed and threw her arms around Glenn's neck. She was loath to do so, but it was that or fall. Glenn descended to a spot right above the stage and scooped up Ralph's discarded sword with his right hand. Then, holding Elian in his left arm and the blade in his right, he soared above the prop dragon's head. It's over, Black Dragon. Ralph's sword pierced the beast's brow. The actors moving the creature performed one last dying roar, then immediately withdrew to the wing. And thus did the hero King Ralph slay the Black Dragon and liberate its former lands. The crowd went wild. No history books mentioned anything about Ralph using flight magecraft. As part of the performance, however, Glenn's spell had a very powerful impact. The applause directed at the stage was nothing like the first half. Everyone was cheering, totally absorbed in the play. Elian snapped out of her daze. Oh, right. I still have a line to say. In the last scene, Amelia was supposed to praise Ralph and give him a kiss on the cheek. The thought of kissing any man other than Felix made her sick to her stomach, even if she was only acting. Regardless, she had to carry out her duty. Shoving her anger and unhappiness back down into the pit of her stomach, she pasted on a beautiful smile. May the blessing of the spirits be with you, Lord Ralph. Still in Glenn's arms, Elian tried to kiss him on the cheek, intending to stop just before she touched him, of course. However, as her lips drew near, Glenn quickly twisted his head away. Elian was dumbfounded as he whispered in her ear, "Hey, you gotta save that for someone you really love." Elian's pale cheeks flushed a rosy pink. To the audience, it must have looked like she was hanging her head in embarrassment. The way she was trembling only added to the effect. But shame wasn't the emotion raging inside her like a tempest. It was anger. I was going to kiss him despite not wanting to, and he had the gall to reject me. Him, a mere stand-in. Her anger was so intense, she felt like sparks were going off in her head. You've shamed me. The vestiges of the crimson wrath eating away at her were weak, they didn't possess even a fraction of the curse's original power. By the time Glenn rescued her, the effect had already dispersed like a single drop of ink in a spring. In other words, The anger filling her mind now had nothing to do with the curse, this fury was purely her own. Amid the bombastic applause, she looked up at Glenn, rage burning in her eyes. This is unforgivable. I shall have my revenge, Glenn Dudley. Grand applause welled up from the audience, everyone looked moved. Even Felix clapped heartily from his seat next to Monica. That was an incredible play, he said before turning to her. Oh, but you don't look so well. Monica, who had been completely focused on secretly extinguishing the flames, was still holding her chest as her heart tried to pound its way out. That was really, really bad for my heart. It's beating so hard. Indeed. I'll have to ask those in charge a few questions. Felix had evidently realized the flames and collapsing set pieces were unintentional. Please don't let him discover I'm the one who put out the fires. Felix turned his head to look at the seats behind them. Dudley is amazing, he murmured. Ha, said Monica. The prince continued to stare at the audience. From the side, his face was missing its usual gentle smile. His expression was clear, devoid of emotion, his blue eyes alone slowly scanning the crowd. He acted quickly in an emergency and still guided the play to a successful conclusion. Truly an act worthy of a hero who will live on in people's memories. It finally dawned on Monica. Felix was looking at the smiles on the audience's faces, smiles put there by Glenn. The corners of Felix's lips turned up a little. It must be people like him who are called heroes. His empty blue eyes, thin smile, and quiet voice all unsettled her. The audience moved as a group, funneling back into the school building. Even in clear weather, the autumn wind was chilly. Monica unconsciously rubbed her arms. President, Monica. Suddenly, she heard Glenn's voice, almost a scream. She turned toward the sound and saw him leap off the edge of the stage and rush toward them. But he wasn't wearing his usual cheery smile. His face was tensed in fear. Dudley, what's wrong? Asked Felix calmly. Glenn swiftly dove behind the two of them. I need, what do you call it? Right. Asylum. Why you need asylum? Monica tilted her head in confusion. The word seemed to imply a pretty dangerous situation. Using her and Felix as a wall, Glenn hunkered down. Monica wondered just what had happened to the boy who had only moments ago been showered with applause. In Monica's place, Felix asked, Dudley, what are you running from? Well, my master apparently saw me in the play just now. Monica recalled Felix's words from before. According to him, Glenn was apprenticed to a famous mage. He told me never to use flight magecraft without supervision, and I disobeyed. And now he knows about it. This is bad, this is bad, this is really bad. He's gonna be furious. Judging from Glenn's terror, his master must be fearsome indeed. Glenn, your master, said Monica. Is he really that scary? Yes, he is. He wouldn't even think twice about grabbing my head and chucking me out the window. Glenn was tall for his age. What mage could possibly grab his head and toss him around? Monica was envisioning a huge, muscle-bound man when Glenn's eyes flew open as wide as they could go. Gyah, he shrieked. Master. Then there was a muffled thump, the sound of a ball of compressed air slamming down right on top of Glenn's head. It wasn't meant to be lethal, but its force was no joke. Glenn made a woof noise and fell to his hands and knees. Monica could tell it had hurt. As she began to tremble, she heard a familiar voice behind her. Oh, hello, Glenn, it said. What, I wonder, could possibly make you want to run away the moment you saw your master's face? Wait, no, it can't be. Can it? Thought Monica, turning around. And there he was, just as she'd suspected, her fellow sage Louis Miller, the barrier mage. Without so much as a glance at Monica or Felix, Louis grabbed the back of Glenn's head in one hand and dragged him to his feet. He might have been a thug off the street based on his behavior. And yet he looked so handsome and attractive. It was hard to watch. This made perfect sense to Monica. Louis could definitely grab Glenn with one hand and throw him around. And he wouldn't hesitate to do so, either. Monica knew just how strong his grip was, how powerful his arms were, and how little mercy he showed to anyone. She felt the pieces fall into place, but that didn't stop her trembling. Held up by the back of his head, Glenn began to make excuses, tears in his eyes. I had to use flight magecraft back there. It would have been seriously dangerous if I hadn't, and, Oh yes, of course. I am in no way criticizing your behavior during the play. In contrast to Glenn's wailing, Louis kept his tone elegant and refined. But that just made it sound even colder. That said, I hear you quite frequently use flight magecraft to get to and from school. Is that right? How did you know? I happened to say hello to your parents earlier. I must say, your magecraft skills have really grown. That head of yours still seems utterly empty, however. Yeah. Ow. Have you forgotten your little mishap? You know, the one where you crashed into my house and cracked the outside wall? He produced that final hymn in a much lower and scarier register. I never expected Glenn to be Mr. Louis's apprentice, but now that Monica knew, several other things made sense. The boy had transferred in around the same time as her. Louis must have wanted him to act as a decoy so Monica didn't stand out. And Louis's ability to walk right into the school festival from the front gates made sense if one assumed Glenn had invited him. He probably hadn't told Monica about his pupil because he didn't want her, with her poor acting skills, to have too much information. If she'd known Glenn was his pupil from the start, she wouldn't have been able to interact with him as naturally. But how am I supposed to act right now? Does Mr. Louis realize the prince is here? He couldn't be so angry at Glenn that he failed to notice, right? Wondered Monica, fidgeting. As Louis proceeded to give Glenn a thrashing, Felix said gently, Count of Magic Miller, I don't appreciate you getting violent with a student from my school. For a moment, Louis's eyes narrowed dangerously. He quickly let go of the back of Glenn's head. The boy took this chance to run behind Felix, groaning, P. President. Why, look who it is, Your Royal Highness, said Louis, as if his thuggish behavior moments before had been merely an illusion. He directed an elegant smile at the prince before placing a hand to his breast and turning on the theatrics. I must say, Serendia Academy's school festival is truly a sight to behold. Especially that play just now. How wonderful, and wonderfully shocking, it was. The sage was indirectly asking for confirmation that the events of the play had been accidental, but it would take more than this to ruffle the prince, of course. The play's success was thanks mainly to Dudley's efforts, he said, turning to look at Glenn behind him. Glenn's mood clearly brightened. Heh. He laughed, a silly grin on his face. You think so? Heh. Such a simple boy. Louis glared at his easily placated pupil for a moment, then covered up his expression with a smile. The sheer difference between the wickedness with which he stared at Glenn and the friendly smile he offered Felix was incredible. By the way, I noticed the play employed a great deal of magecraft, Louis remarked. It seems Serendia Academy is quite enthusiastic about the subject. Are you very familiar with such things, sir? Felix responded with a reserved smile. No, I don't study magecraft, so I have no specialized knowledge. Nothing I could speak of in the presence of a sage like yourself, at least. They spoke as though trading small talk, but beneath the surface, they were probing each other. It was enough to give Monica a stomachache. When Louis was first ordered to protect Felix, the sage had fitted a brooch with a location-tracking magecraft formula, then sent it to the prince via the king. Louis had assumed that no novice would be capable of deciphering the formula embedded in such a magic item. But Felix had realized there was a tracking formula in the brooch and destroyed it, insisting he'd only broken it by accident. Both of them were denying what they'd done, Louis that he'd placed a tracking formula in the brooch and Felix that he'd understood it. She could almost hear their thoughts. You noticed the tracking formula in the item, didn't you? You were trying to use the item to keep tabs on me, weren't you? Monica held her breath as she watched their exchange. Why does the prince want to hide his knowledge of magecraft anyway? In Corlapton, he'd privately shared with her that he was actually quite interested in the subject and that he was a huge fan of the silent witch. A lot of nobles dabble in magecraft, and studying it hardly seems like a disadvantage. After all, those with skill, like Cyril, were highly prized. Serendia Academy even had its own magecraft-related courses and clubs. So why did Felix hide his interest in it? Monica didn't understand. She'd reported to Louis through Arwen that she'd encountered Felix in disguise at the festival in Corlapton. But she hadn't included the secrets Ike had told her that night about his interest in magic. Her private excuse for keeping these secrets was that Ike had been the one to tell her, not the prince. If she told Louis everything, she would be betraying her new friend after their very first night out together. As she quietly watched Louis and Felix go at it, Glenn chimed in, completely oblivious. Wait, do the two of you know each other? Felix and Louis both shot him very similar types of smiles, the kind that said they weren't going to confirm or deny anything and that he was free to draw his own conclusions. The one to finally end the conversation was Felix. In any case, I should get going, he said. With how busy he was, he only had so much time to allot to a single guest. In effect, he was saying that he had no more time to waste on a mage who supported the first prince. Louis didn't try to prolong the conversation, either. Please do give your grandfather my regards, he replied, smiling meaningfully. Felix responded with a smile of his own but said nothing. Their curt exchange, the tension in the air, the slight variations in their expressions, all of it pointed to a mutual struggle to distract, deceive, and probe. Just being near them was enough to wear a person down. As Monica stood by, watching with bated breath, Felix turned to her. I need to speak with those involved in the play. Please continue to enjoy the school festival. Okay. With a mild bow to Louis, the prince left. Louis, for his part, grabbed Glenn by the nape of his neck, said, It's time for your lecture, and dragged him away. Left alone, Monica darted her eyes between the two receding figures until a small yellow bird alighted on her shoulder. It was Ryn. Silent witch, excellent work putting out the fires, she said, her chartreuse eyes gazing up at Monica. They were the same color in her human form. Staring back into those vivid irises, Monica whispered, Miss Ryn? Yes. I guess, Glenn is Mr. Louis's pupil, huh? The bird moved its little head up and down. She'd probably been sworn to silence by Louis, and Monica had no intention of criticizing her for it. But there was something she needed to ask. Could it be that Glenn, doesn't know anything about the mission? Glenn had looked completely clueless the whole time Louis and Felix were facing off. It was possible he was ignorant even of the contention between the first and second prince's supporters. The yellow bird answered plainly. Does Lord Glenn seem like the type of person who would be able to support you from the shadows? Or join in any sort of undercover mission? Well, no. For better or worse, Glenn seemed basically incapable of harboring ulterior motives. He was an indiscreet, cheerful, and altogether straightforward young man. Lord Louis told me he sent Lord Glenn here to camouflage your arrival. Felix had assumed Louis was sniffing around and had put up his guard. If Monica alone had transferred immediately afterward, he'd have suspected her of being the sage's pawn. So Louis had sent Glenn in at the same time. If Glenn, his pupil, was to show up, Felix's caution would naturally be directed at him, and he'd be less likely to suspect Monica. In addition, Lord Glenn knows nothing of this. Then Louis really did send his clueless pupil here as camouflage. Talk about heartless. If Lord Glenn knew of your identity and the mission, he would likely fail to keep it a secret, said Ryn. I believe remaining silent on this point is for the best. I agree. While she was shocked to learn of Louis and Glenn's connection, Monica was secretly relieved that Glenn didn't know who she really was. He wasn't being friendly merely because of the mission, he had no idea of her identity, and yet he had still approached her and treated her kindly. She was happy to learn that when he'd said he was her friend, he hadn't been lying. If possible, she wanted to remain friends with him. I have to keep my true identity hidden. Monica was finding it surprisingly difficult to imagine letting go of her current life. Serendia Academy's faculty room was inundated with guests going in and out, one after another. The youngest staff member, Lindsay Pale, watched their faces out of the corner of her eye as she prepared some black tea. The guests were Serendia Academy alumni or those with a connection to one of the teachers, all nobles from respected families. A lot of prominent individuals were going in and out to offer their greetings to Duke Clockford in particular, who was stationed at the back of the room. Despite the presence of so many other nobles, the Duke stood out. His features recalled the handsomeness of his youth, as well as his grandson Felix. Unlike the prince with his ever-gentle smile, however, the Duke always seemed cold, like a lake in midwinter. Anger him even slightly and you'd find yourself drowning in that lake before you knew what had happened. Duke Clockford was an important man who had contributed much to the kingdom's development, but Lindsay felt a whole lot more fear toward him than respect. I think I'll just stay out of his sight, she thought, placing the tea on a tray. Over by a window, sunlight streaming through the glass, the waterbite mage William Macregan was having a pleasant chat with the mage of violet smoke Gideon Rutherford. As she set the tea down next to them, Lindsay overheard some of what the two old teachers were saying. "Ah, speaking of, I just heard from Louis," remarked Rutherford. "Apparently, that Everett girl is still holing up like a recluse." Replied Macregan. "She hasn't changed since her time at Minerva's, I suppose. Since she's already graduated, I feel bad nitpicking. But can't anything be done about that shyness of hers?" Apparently, Rutherford was concerned about someone very shy. Teachers at Minerva's must have it pretty rough, too, thought Lindsay. She understood the feeling. She had someone like that in her class, too. But that girl, Monica Norton, had become a lot more cheerful since transferring to the academy, so she wasn't too worried about her. Lindsay privately hoped this Everett person Professor Rutherford was so worried about would make some friends. She watched as Macregan picked up his teacup in both hands and said, "If it's Everett you're worried about, I have a strange feeling you needn't be concerned." "Oh," replied Rutherford dubiously. Macregan loudly sipped at his tea, then said in a relaxed tone, "I'm almost certain she's having much more fun than you think."